Member for Johnston.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise today on behalf of the people of Johnston and for every Territorian who's ever looked at this amazing place we live and thought, we deserve better than this. This is not a traditional budget reply because I don't want to spend my time tearing down what the government has done line by line, because I think the more important conversation is about what our territory actually could be. I want to talk about possibility and the territory we could build if we were brave enough to choose it. Madam Speaker, the Northern Territory is an extraordinary place. We are home to the oldest living culture on earth, to some of the most breathtaking landscapes and ecosystems anywhere in the world. Darwin Harbour's biodiversity rivals the Ningaloo Reef. We're home to the world's largest intact savanna woodland, some of its last free-flowing rivers, and Australia's largest terrestrial national park. Our communities are incredibly diverse and vibrant. Our people are deeply resilient. And these are the things that Territorians tell me they love about this place. These are the things that make people stay, and these are the things that make people come here. And people deserve a government that fights to protect these things, not one that sells them off piece by piece to the highest bidder. Madam Speaker, the Treasurer has told us that this is a budget for everyday Territorians. So I want to talk about the everyday Territorians that I speak with. Every day I hear from frontline workers who are burnt out, not because they don't care, but because the system that they're holding up for all of us is crumbling beneath them. Doctors, nurses, social workers who've worked one too many shifts in a double-bunked emergency department, watching people suffer consequences that were completely preventable. This government claims record health funding, but the budget papers tell the real story. They've cut funding for primary health care, including in remote communities, and cut funding for disease prevention, things that we know in the long term down the track we're all going to be paying for. Madam Speaker, every day I speak to legal aid and NARJA lawyers carrying caseloads of 30 to 50 people in a system that was broken before they arrived. I speak to teachers who are the last safety net for vulnerable children because there is no net underneath them. I speak to police and paramedics responding to unmanaged mental illness and alcohol harm, not because it's their job, but because there's nothing else. I speak to women fleeing violence who are being turned away from shelters, turned away in the jurisdiction with the highest rates of domestic and family violence in the country. And this budget delivers no domestic and family violence infrastructure framework, none. That can't be an oversight, that must be a choice. I speak to renters, more than half the people that I represent, who cannot find an affordable place to live. There is nothing for them in this budget. I speak to community service workers, the people who hold this territory together, who are undervalued, underpaid and invisible in these pages. Madam Speaker, these are the everyday Territorians this budget is supposed to serve, and they are being left behind. And I want to say very plainly that this is not inevitable. Remaining in a state of critical underfunding is a choice. Building bigger prisons while cutting youth justice by $13 million is a choice. Increasing funding for police public safety officers nearly fivefold while cutting domestic violence services by 10% is a choice. Subsidising multinational gas corporations while turning away women fleeing violence is a choice. The government says when you question spending on arresting people and locking them up, that is soft on crime. But here is what I know. The hard work, the actual hard work of making communities safer is investment in people and investment in prevention. And when it comes to that work, there is no money in this budget. So, Madam Speaker, let me describe what this budget could have been. Let me describe the territory I believe in and the territory I believe we should be working towards. A territory where no child sits in detention on remand. Right now, at least 70% of the children in our prisons are there on remand, not convicted of anything. In February, the average time a child spent on remand was 86 days. That's an increase of 28% from July last year. We're spending over $3,600 per day per child to hold them in a system that will make their lives worse. That's not tough on crime. That is wasteful, that is harmful, that is wrong, and we will all pay the price for it. We know what works. There are many examples in Australia and beyond of alternatives that actually will make us safer. Programs like Project Kilhahu in Hawaii, trauma-informed, culturally competent, community-based, which helped achieve 0 girls in youth detention. The evidence is there and the alternatives exist. It's a choice not to use them. We could invest in early intervention. We could invest in community-based justice. We could invest in the families, in the schools, and in the services that hold children safe before the system gets hold of them. That is how you actually reduce crime. We could have a territory where a woman fleeing violence can always find a bed. Not sometimes, not if she's lucky, always. That is not a radical statement. In a jurisdiction with the highest rates of domestic and family violence in the country, it should be the absolute minimum of what we offer. We've heard, and I've certainly heard, that hundreds of women every month in the Territory are turned away from domestic and family violence services because those services are under-resourced. And this budget does not address that. We can do better and we must do better. We could have a territory where healthcare reaches people before they reach crisis. With sustained investment in preventative care, we could have a safer and healthier territory, not just for now, but for generations into the future. We could cut hospital wait times dramatically. We could ensure that people in remote communities have access to care before preventable conditions become emergencies. We could stop flying people into Darwin multiple times when a single coordinated visit would do the job. This is not magical thinking, it's what happens when you spend money on the front end instead of on the back end. We could have a territory where everybody has a safe place to live. We could halve the public housing wait list and then halve it again and again until overcrowding is ended, not just reduced. We could invest in renters and make the territory an affordable, fair and safe place to call home. We could look to the future and not the past in how we power our territory. We have an extraordinary opportunity. The territory could lead the world in the sustainable rollout of renewable energy, lower power prices, homes that are comfortable and affordable and safe to live in, jobs that don't disappear when a gas contract expires. Instead, this budget cuts environment investment by 20% and continues to subsidise an injury that provides around only 2.4% of territory jobs, while healthcare and social assistance provide 20%. So if we care about jobs, and we do and we should, we must be investing in the workers who actually provide them and the industries that those workers work in. We can have a territory where environmental regulations are strengthened, not gutted, where communities receive services alongside infrastructure, not years after it, where the GST funding that we get because of First Nations disadvantage actually reaches First Nations communities transparently and accountably. We could have a territory where all public appointments require transparent, merit-based vetting, where the Auditor-General has standard performance review powers as in other jurisdictions, and where the government can transparently show how much of our GST funding is actually reaching the remote communities and First Nations people whose disadvantage help justify it. Madam Speaker, the government will tell you we cannot afford this, but that is simply not true. We can end the hidden subsidies to the gas industry, hundreds of millions of public dollars directed to multinational corporations that could instead fund hospital beds, house families and keep communities safe. We could redirect the more than $6 million a year given to the Office of the Territory Coordinator, a body designed to centralise power and bypass environmental law in service of profits. We can stop underwriting private industry risk. The shift lift commits hundreds of millions of dollars with no meaningful return to the average Territorian. The same applies to gas contracts designed to prop up projects that would not stand on their own without government backing. We could have a territory where we have, as I said, the Auditor General has standard performance review powers where we could actually see where the money's going and where Territorians could know that it's being spent in their interests and not in the interests of industry and others. Madam Speaker, I think it's important to say when we're talking about the budget that almost 80% of our budget comes from the Commonwealth. More than half of that is GST revenue. And as I've said, that's funding intended to address disadvantage here, and that's the money that this government is directing into prisons rather than into the services and supports that reduce disadvantage at its root. That is not responsible choices. Last year, when I asked the Treasurer how they measure whether this funding is being used as intended, whether GST revenue is actually reducing disadvantage, and how they measure it, the answer was, we don't. We don't measure it. Madam Speaker, budgets are about choices. This government is choosing to spend money meant to address disadvantage on locking people up without even measuring whether it is doing what it's set out to do. Madam Speaker, we can demand a fairer share from the Commonwealth. As I said, where more than 50% of our budget comes from GST, we're totally reliant on it, but it's not keeping pace with inflation. And things like the petroleum resource rent tax do not deliver anyone in Australia a fair return. There's been a lot of talk about a 25% export tax, and without something like that, gas exports from gas that belongs to us, exported to other places, do not benefit us. We do not get the profit from it. The government's own budget this year shows that expected royalties to mining and petroleum will barely change over the forward estimates, even as subsidies continue to grow. We're told that asking the oil and gas industry to pay its fair share would cost jobs. Not only is that claim very unlikely to be true, but what the government forgets to mention is that mining accounts for around 2.4% of jobs in the Territory. So a tiny proportion of the jobs that are here. We can also fix simple inefficiencies. We can fund single care coordinators, I've mentioned that before, to organise treatments. I hear over and over again about people who live in remote communities who are flown in and out of Darwin multiple times for appointments. It's a waste of their time, it's a waste of the clinician's time, and it's a huge waste of our money. We can invest in prevention. Underground power reduces outages and avoids repeated repair costs. Disaster mitigation means floods don't decimate communities. Madam Speaker, climate adaptation is not an optional choice for us now. It's essential to avoid the escalating financial cost and human cost of increasingly severe disasters. And yes, if we borrow to invest in housing, healthcare and prevention, that's responsible debt. But cutting essential services to prioritise external creditors while subsidising billion-dollar industries is not fiscal responsibility. That's a value statement and that's a choice. Madam Speaker, we absolutely have the capacity to fund the basics and build a Territory where all people are safe, all people are healthy, all people are housed. What we need is a government willing to choose that. The better life gets here, the more people want to come. The more people who choose to build their lives here in the Territory, the better place we are to address things like the critical staffing shortages that are breaking our essential services. A more stable workforce means less burnout, fewer experienced people leaving after 2 or 3 years because the system ground them down. All of this makes life better for those of us who already call this place home, some of whom have done so for tens of thousands of years. It's not complicated, it's not radical, and that's what good government looks like. So why hasn't this government chosen it? Is it because the donors who fund their campaigns, property developers, mining and gas lobby groups, expect kickbacks? Because Territorians are paying the price. Madam Speaker, we deserve better. Our kids deserve better, our communities deserve better, and better is possible. It's a no-brainer. The Territory can afford this, and what's missing is political will. So when you look at this budget, ask yourself, who is the everyday Territorian that this budget is for? Because I believe that every Territorian deserves to thrive in our beautiful Territory, not just the privileged, the powerful and the connected. All Territorians deserve us in this chamber to have the courage and the political will to make this beautiful territory even better. And Madam Speaker, that's what this budget should be doing. That's the budget we should have here, a budget that is really for all Territorians. Thank you, Madam Speaker.